Hello and welcome to Unprofessional Engineering. My name is James.
You got Luke.
Luke, we're joined once again by Dr. Martin Fisher, co-founder and CEO of KickStart International. Martin, thank you very much for joining us once again.
Fantastic. Thank you.
So you see, we're friends now that we did one episode, so I can call him Martin now. You see how that works, Luke? That's respect I'm showing. I know you don't know much about that, Luke. It's fine.
I try. So Martin, I just called him Martin. We're like that now. So when we last chatted, you were talking about this pivot point when you changed your business model back in 2016. So start there and talk about what that pivot looked like and how that business has changed from 2016 until now, 2020.
Fantastic. So the first sort of 16 years from 2000 to 2016, we had been going out with a big team of sales staff and literally going farm to farm, meeting farmers, convincing them with really a retail model to change the way they farm, to go down to their local shop and buy an irrigation pump and start irrigating.
When you told that story, I was envisioning like door-to-door vacuum salesmen,
right?
Where they like had a suitcase that they opened that had the pump in it and was like, let me show you how to do it. Or like they would cut the pennies in half when they're selling like the Costco or the Cutco knives. Like they had to demo it, right? That's what they did.
That's right. And it's virtually that way. And the farmer wants to see that demo, preferably on their farm. Maybe they'll go to their neighbor's farm, but they won't go very far to see it.
Right.
Gotcha.
And they have to see it to believe it. This is a new thing they've never seen before, and you're telling them to change their life and buy this new thing. And in every one of the retail shops, we had a live demo out front also, so they could actually see the pumping water right there. And we used to do pumping competitions where we would, have a pickup truck and two pumps on the back and huge crowds and banners and bring everybody together. And two people are trying to fill a drum.
That is awesome.
And we did all these things, but it works, but it's all very expensive. And a lot of branding and billboards and radio and TV, just to reach people and convince them to buy pumps. And so we said, that's great. We reached 1 million people out of poverty by 2016, but that was a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed in Africa. The truth is, in that period of time, the population of Africa every 7 or 8 years is growing by about 250 million people, and so
wow.
We need to do a whole lot more than 1 million people. And that's where we asked ourselves, what would it take to actually move sub-Saharan Africa to something like 20% irrigated from where it started, which is in many, many countries more like 1 or 2% irrigated of the farmland. So we said we need to pivot our model. We need to get a whole lot more efficient. And what we said is the best way to do that is going to be to leverage what other people are already doing. We've got all these international nonprofits, big nonprofits, NGOs. We've got the UN agencies. We've got government agencies who are already working with literally thousands of farmers on the ground. They're out there implementing programs around schools, around education, around water and sanitation, around healthcare. If they can introduce irrigation into their programs to their farmers, they can meet their goals and help their farmers a lot. And so we said, let's work with them to get to the farmers, to reach the farmers, to convince the farmers instead of us doing it. So instead of us needing hundreds of staff out there in the field, we now only need one or two higher level staff in each country who now, instead of meeting with a farmer, you're meeting with the country manager of Save the Children or CARE or World Vision or Vision Fund, and convincing them to introduce irrigation into their programs. We still have to get out there and demonstrate to their farmers, but really it's now their field staff who are going to do most of the hard lifting here. They already have that trusted relationship. And so we pivoted out, we changed our whole staff structure. At the same time, we expanded from 5 countries to 16 countries. But now we only need 1 or 2 or 3 staff in each country instead of a team of 50, 100, 200 staff in each country. So very much more efficient model. We still are working in the private sector. So private sector distribution is critical so that the pumps and the spare parts are available. So now we have distributors, importers, who bring in a container load of pumps into a country from China and then on-sell to local retail shops so that the supply chain is there so farmers can get spare parts, can get pumps, and then working with these partners to do all the education, the stuff that we used to do ourselves. Much, much more cost effective. At the same time, we said, okay, we need to develop new technologies. Now, when it comes to something like solar pumps, okay, we're very good at mechanical human powered pumps. We've been doing it for years. We're probably the best in the world by far. We can say that. But we can't say that for solar pumps. So we need to collaborate a lot more on that also. So we said we're moving to a stage where even on our technology development, it's much more collaborative, bringing in private sector partners, people who know things about brushless DC motors and solar power. Still working collaboratively with our technical team. And then the third thing on the pivot is, that's number 2 is the innovations. The third thing on the pivot is the advocacy play, which is we now need to get together and change the conversation so that all of the major stakeholders, the donors, the major partners who are helping in Africa, the governments, put smallholder irrigation onto their agendas. So they put in place the right funding, the right policies, the right investments that bring in the private sector as well, to make smallholder irrigation available locally, to really move the needle on what's happening and move the continent to more like 20% irrigated. And now that's advocacy work, which is very different kind of work. That's now you try to find out who are the thought leaders, who are the people who have to whisper in their ears to get them to stand on stage and say irrigation is a great thing. So we're working on those kind of strategies. But all of a sudden, moving from what was really a very insular sort of social enterprise where we were doing all the work ourselves with our own staff, to something which is all about collaboration and partnerships. So a big mind shift and change in the way we work as an organization. And it took us 3 or 4 years to make that change. Different kind of staffing, different operations, moving into these new countries, building new partnerships. We now have about 350 partners across sub-Saharan Africa who are using our pumps in their programs. And this is from the very biggest organizations, even the World Bank and the government. For example, Angola has just bought 2,000 pumps to program there.
Wow.
We've got, CARE, Save the Children, ICRC, all the big international NGOs, World Food Program, FAO. They're all using our pumps in their programs now, plus a whole lot of government programs and then the small nonprofits. And some of them are only using 10 or 15, 20 pumps on a small project. Others are helping distribute thousands, literally thousands of pumps to farmers. And so much, much more cost effective and getting a lot more impact across these countries. So that was our pivot. But then we said, okay, we also need a cheaper pump. As we discussed last time, we had a $160 pump, which was the little Stairmaster machine. That's cheap for us, but expensive for a farmer. We had the $90 pump, which we call the hip pump, which is sort of rocking motion. Looks like a bicycle pump with a pivoted base. But we need a $50 pump. And now that $50 pump has to include everything. It's the hose pipes, the suction hose, and the pressure hose, and the pump itself. And of course, it's mass produced in China. It has to be imported into Africa. It has to go through a distributor who has to make money. It has to go through a retailer who has to make money. So, production cost on that pump has to be more like $11 or $12.
Wow.
And then some more money, maybe another 10 or 15 for the hose pipes in order to retail at $50. So that was the challenge we set out a couple of years ago to work on. How could we take our hip pump, basic same model, but reduce the cost by 50% and keep the performance at 75%. The same 75% in the water, but half the cost. And this involved a lot of pretty high-tech engineering, and we partnered here with Autodesk in terms of a lot of the computational fluid dynamics modeling in terms of their software for using, doing all the modeling around and CAD programming on the pump design. And we did. It's injection molded plastic. We're about to launch this pump in about 2 months from now. It'll be launched into the Kenyan market. And this pump will retail at $50 and allow a farmer still to irrigate about 3/4 of an acre of land if they work for a couple hours in the morning, a couple hours in the evening.
Wow.
In fact, we have one farmer using a prototype. He was using it to irrigate 2 acres of land. He had 6 employees who were continually cycling through using it. And then he bought a petrol pump, but he soon abandoned that because it wasn't it's very hard to maintain a petrol pump. And he's now upgraded to one of our prototype solar pumps, which is a whole nother design field that we're working on, as a low-cost solar pump. But this guy started with absolutely nothing. He had a job in a factory, one of the lucky few, but he was making about $50 a month sorting coffee and trying to look after his family. And he couldn't survive. and he had 4 kids. So he quit that job, and him and his wife started using a bucket to do a bit of irrigation. They rented a little plot of land, quarter-acre plot of land. And then he bought a very early prototype hip pump, expanded into an acre, and then into 2 acres that he rented. Now he's a very proud, by local terms, very wealthy businessman with multiple employees and selling a lot of fruits and vegetables.
Doesn't that really put it into perspective, though, where we've now reduced the cost of the pump. I'm part of this. You've now reduced the cost of this pump down to $50. But looking back, this was an entire month's pay for him in the factory job that he has, not to mention the other expenses and the family that he has to take care of. That is just crazy to me. Boy, yeah. Great to hear about the success, though.
And this is the other thing, of course, that we're now working, of course, with organizations, all these partners, and many of them are finding ways to help farmers afford these pumps. Mm-hmm. The best solution, of course, is if it can be microfinance, where a microfinance organization can give a loan to a farmer so they can buy this pump and pay it back. We know they can pay it back within 4 or 5 months, in fact. And we have partnerships with microfinance organizations. But it's very, very challenging for microfinance organizations to give loans to poor rural farmers in Africa. And it's the same reasons that we had initially, which is that door-to-door salesperson. Even with microfinance in the rural area, you have to get out there. You have to organize the farmers into a group and give them loans. The cost of customer acquisition is extremely high for microfinance in rural Africa. Very different than rural India, where generally poor farmers live in a village and farm on the farm every day. They walk out to the farm. The vast majority of farmers in Africa are homesteaders. They live on their farm. And so you actually have to go and collect them on the farm. They don't come together in the village at night. So even rural microfinance is still very early days in Africa, but we're working with the rural microfinance organizations, trying to find ways to bring that cost down. People are leveraging technology and the like. And then with some of our other partners, they do sort of partial subsidy for the pump and different types of loans. And so by working through partners, we also brought down the price, affordability for the farmers, and then getting this $50 pump in there. So now now the challenge is, okay, now we need to scale up. We're at 1.3 million, so we're up to another 0.3 million people who are out of poverty. We want to get to that 2 million by 2024. And that does involve a lot of acceleration, of course, with COVID. That set us back a little bit.
Yeah, I bet.
But we're coming out of that now in terms of the impact it's having on our business. Starting to see things take off again. And interestingly, with COVID, of course, it's one of the things that people are realizing from COVID is it's creating a hunger pandemic around the world. And the reason for this is it's disrupted a lot of the normal business trade. So a lot of the exports of crops and food that was going to Africa is not going there anymore. It's disrupted the lockdowns that they've put in place in Africa, and they've had to put lockdowns in place there. So they're restricting trade. They closed all the ports. They kept people from going outside of the city. So it also disrupted the supply chain for seeds and fertilizer to get to farmers and for the farmers to get their products into the market. On top of that, global remittances are down, because if you think about all the people here who've lost their jobs, many of them are immigrants from Africa who otherwise would be sending money home to their families. That money is down by 25%.
Wow.
And then urban to rural remittances are also down. Many, many farming families send somebody to the city to work in that informal sector I described and to send money back. But that informal sector has collapsed, a lot of it, with the lockdowns, because social distancing, when you're doing informal work in the market, is very difficult. And so all of this is resulting in a situation where there's increased hunger. And on top of that, we think about climate change, which is hitting Africa very, very hard. And it used to be, when I first went to Kenya, back in 1985, you could literally predict every year within plus or minus a couple of weeks when the rains were going to start and when they were going to stop. Today, you have no idea when the rains are going to start or stop. They could come at any time. And of course, this is one of the great things about irrigation, is you're no longer dependent on the rains. And people are using the irrigation to grow year-round and to grow high-value crops. But they're still planting their staple crops, their maize, with the rain. But now if the rains fail, they would lose that crop. But with irrigation, they can save that crop. And then if there's floods, which you're also getting because the rains are more unreliable and actually flooding and washing away the crops, And also climate change is bringing locust invasions. You might have heard about the locust invasions in East Africa. The good thing, again, with irrigation is if your crop gets wiped out by a flood or locust, you can replant quickly. Don't have to wait for the next rainy season. So irrigation is really helping these farmers adapt to climate change and enabling them to have food security and resilience. And of course, this is even more necessary with COVID and also better nutrition throughout the year. So they're going to have better immune systems in terms of when they do get attacked by the virus.
Martin, with respect to the climate change, you're talking about how there's flooding now and the rain is inconsistent or at least not reliable like it used to be. Are they also seeing then problems with the water that they're going into for the wells that they're digging? You said how you could find it just a few meters below the surface. Are they going to have to start digging deeper, or is that water running out because of that at times during the year?
Yeah, so when you're talking about shallow aquifers, and as I said earlier, something like 20 to 30% of farmers have access to shallow aquifers on their farm. And just to be clear, that's not saying that 20 to 30% of the land in sub-Saharan Africa has shallow aquifers. But what it is saying is that throughout history, people have lived in places where there is access to shallow water. So that's where the population concentrations are. And absolutely, those shallow aquifers are seasonal. In the dry season, they do get a bit deeper. In the rainy season, they get much shallower. But this is renewable. It's renewable aquifers renewed by the rainfall. And so, yes, when you get these long dry seasons, absolutely the depth of those wells does get deeper. And when it rains, it comes up sometimes as close as, 1 or 2 meters to the surface, and then it'll drop down to, 7 or 8 meters. And there is a bit of a drive in some places where we need slightly deeper pumps. Our pumps, as I said, they're suction pumps. They only go down to 7 or 8 meters.
Right.
This is one of the reasons to be working on a solar pump, which is now a submersible pump. And therefore it can have, as much power as you put into it, you can get as deep as you want. The ones we're designing are those which will be sort of optimized at about 8 or 9 meters, but go down to 12, 15 meters. Now, much deeper than 12 or 15 meters, of course, it's very expensive to dig your well, as you can imagine. So people don't usually go much deeper. The other thing people are doing is they're building catchments to catch the rain. So they put up a little dam or they dig a hole in the ground, like a sort of swimming pool-sized hole, and that gets filled up with rainwater, and then they irrigate off that for the rest of the year. Sometimes you need to put a plastic liner, sometimes you don't, depending on your soil. So that's the other sort of technology which is happening.
So COVID, pandemic aside, I think virtually every industry and business has been, impacted, and it's even, multiplied in these situations and in third world countries. That aside, what are other challenges that either right now or kind of, you mentioned this solar pump. I imagine there's a price point, like what are the next big hurdles? Because it sounds like this big $50 hurdle is going to be solved here in the next 2 months, and that'll, give access to a lot of other folks. Sounds like it's, you said it's injected molded, so this thing's going to be, they're going to be able to produce lots of these really quickly. What's that next big hurdle that you see maybe with this solar pump or whatever else you have on the horizon?
Yeah, absolutely. The first part of your question was about challenges, and there's running a social enterprise has a huge number of challenges, of course. The number one challenge is usually around funding. We are a nonprofit. We are dependent on philanthropy and people helping us to pay because what we're tackling is market failures and government failures because of this education that I talked about. Even working through these partners, it's still very, very expensive to get out there and make this happen. So that's obviously our biggest challenge is raising the funds to make this possible. On the challenges on the technical side, the biggest challenge there is to bring the price down. Now, we've done that with this human-powered pump, and we're, like I say, down to this $50 price point retail, including the hose pipes and spare parts. Getting much cheaper than that is going to be difficult. Now we said that with the $90 pump too, but we did get it down to 50, so maybe we'll be able to get it a bit lower. As we look at solar, solar has only fairly recently become even a viable alternative. I had said earlier that a human power, we put out continuous, about 100, 120 watts if we're just sort of on a Stairmaster going back and forth or pumping. Now, 100 watts of human power to be replaced by solar power. In general, electric pumps are less efficient than a human-powered pump because you're going from sun to electric and electric to mechanical, and then to pumping water, as opposed to going straight from a human, which is mechanical, to pumping water. So there's an extra step there. So a 100-watt panel is going to be, you actually need a bit more to replace a human. But, not many years ago, it was about $6 a watt installed solar, right? And so that would be $600 to replace a human. Of course, nowadays, it has come down dramatically, and it's down to about 30 cents a watt for very cheapest. So, maybe $30 we could replace a human for about 100 watts, which for the first time now has made solar power at least a viable potential opportunity. Now, it has to be portable. And, of course, carrying solar panels, you can't carry on your back or any other way much more than about 100, 120 watts. So that's another limit, because it has to be a portable pump, because you're going to carry it to the field, to the place where your well is in your farm, and then carry it home every day. You can't leave it in the field. So we're talking about 100, 120 watts of solar power. And what is the price point? Well, right now, the lowest cost solar pumps in the world on the market, which could irrigate a sensible amount of land, which is maybe half an acre in 4 hours, or even if you say half an acre in a day, it's about $450, $500 is the very, very cheapest pump out there. Now, that's a huge amount of money. Our pumps, our cheapest is $50, our most expensive is $160. Now we're talking about $500, $600.
Sounds like you have your work cut out for you.
Yeah. Now we want to get that price down. We think the holy grail is to get that price down to about $200 retail. But $200 retail, again, we have to think, well, what does that mean in terms of production cost? It's going to be down to about $100 or less, right? $90, $80. And that's now for the pump. That's for the cable. That's for the panels. That's for the hose pipe. That's for a way to carry this thing. And so, yeah, it is a very big challenge. And we're looking at that in a couple of different ways. One is say, okay, well, what's the best off-the-shelf pump we can buy? The lowest cost submersible brushless DC motor pump we can buy. And there we've talked to a lot of suppliers and tested a lot of pumps, and we have sourced one pump in China. Now, it's not designed at all for irrigation. It has to go through quite a few modifications. One of our requirements is that this can pump dirty water, because you're putting it into some random hole in the ground. It's not a protected well. It's very dirty. And it has to be very robust. It has to be turned off if you pull it out of the water. It has to have a dry run switch, a lot of things. So modifying the lowest cost pump out there. The other alternative is to actually design your own and brand new design of a very, very low cost brushless DC motor submersible pump. And we actually did have a design process where we worked on one and made a beautiful pump. I don't have it here, but it's about the size of this water bottle, about half the size of this water bottle almost, where it go down even a 2-inch tube and pump water out the top. This is a cable coming down. And you have a brushless DC motor, which has a lot of parts because it's laminations. And in something that size, we had about 800 parts inside. And these laminations in your brushless DC motor, you want to make that an extremely efficient motor and extremely efficient in power. And the challenge there was around mass production. So we produced this prototypes, but in order to have it made consistently with a single injection molding that would encapsulate this whole motor plus the pump body, which is the process we were working with a company out of Chicago to do this, takes very high-tech manufacturing. And we needed about $1 million investment in the tooling, because it really should be put together with robots and assembled. And now when they do that, it could produce, maybe 1 million of these pumps a year, but we don't have a market for 1 million of these pumps a year. So it's not worth investing in that tooling. So that's the challenge, going to very high-tech new manufacturing, and you're building a market from the bottom up, where we're selling, the total sales of solar pumps, small solar pumps in the whole of sub-Saharan Africa, and maybe 5,000 to 10,000 pumps a year. And now we can produce 1 million or 500,000 of these a year. It doesn't make sense to do that kind of tooling. Anyway, so there's some challenges around it, but the holy grail is to get to a pump which is about $200 retail. And one of the things we're looking at there is, can we greatly increase the efficiency of the impeller, of the actual pumping mechanism? And we're working with some very innovative companies and ideas around increasing the efficiency of actually a water pump impeller.
So we are getting close to time, but there are two questions that I really do want to pose to you. So on your website, I saw that you're over 350,000 pumps sold, which is just crazy to me. You've helped, like you mentioned, 1.3 million plus people out of poverty, which is also just great. So this is all coming back to, you're one of those people that makes me feel bad about myself, which isn't great because here I am, I don't know, running a podcast and doing marketing, and that's not cool. But a bunch of our listeners are bad people as well. Is there something that they can do that could help, that would help make them feel better about themselves?
Well, to begin with, there's no point feeling bad about yourself. Everybody can only do in their life the small bit that they can do. I mean, I always say about life is, if each of us does even a small bit in life, we could solve all the problems in the world. The bottom trouble is that some people do almost nothing, right? But if everybody did a small bit, we could solve the problems. Not everybody is going to be able to do what I did. It was, I was very lucky for some, in many ways, to end up where I ended up, and I feel great every day about the work and the impacts we're having. But I was lucky. I had a family where I had free undergraduate education because my dad was an academic. I got a scholarship to, TA-ship at Stanford. I came out of university without any debts. I could volunteer for a couple of years and manage to get by. Certainly, this is not a way to make any money. If you're trying to make money, you don't get into this business.
So this wasn't a get-rich-quick scheme for the last 27 years or whatever it sounds like you've been doing it?
I wish, but no. But the work is extremely satisfying. And what can you do in your own life? Well, of course, there are things. You can make donations to causes that you believe in. You can volunteer. You can just do any good deeds yourself on a day-to-day basis. And what you guys are doing is great. Getting stories out there. There's so many different ways. If you actually want to get involved in this kind of business, there's not that many jobs. So you have a choice. You can try to get a job, in which case you've really got to think about what skills do organizations like Kickstart need. And of course, we're looking for people with real practical experience on the ground, as well as some very hard skills. And how do you build up a portfolio of that? And you have to volunteer. It's not easy to get into these positions. Like I said, with my PhD from Stanford, I had to be a volunteer for 2 years before they would give me a local salary.
They won't even let me volunteer then, so that's good.
But I think there's anyone who's working even for a big company. Most big companies actually do a lot of good. They're creating value. They're creating products and services that make people's lives more enjoyable, better. And so we shouldn't all feel bad about what we're doing in our lives. And creating livelihoods, creating jobs in the business, even in the business you're in. So yeah.
I think Luke is probably about hitting that midlife crisis point in his life. So you might see his resume come across your desk in short order. I don't know.
Yeah, I feel like if I can convince my wife and daughter to go with me, I don't know if it'd be a midlife crisis, maybe a midlife giving.
There you go.
Name, right? But you folks do have, so if you go to kickstart.org/get-involved and donate, you can donate, obviously, directly to Kickstart. And the one thing that we do here at Autodesk, and any of our Autodesk, employees that happen to be listening to this, and I imagine there's just hundreds of them, James.
I'd imagine.
So Autodesk does do a company match up until a certain dollar value, and I notice you call that out on your website. So I would encourage any of our Autodesk, fellow employees, or if your organization does any type of corporate matching for giving, this would be an excellent opportunity to have real impact. And that story of the farmer you told is like, I'm sure that's just one story. Over these years, you probably have hundreds, if not thousands of these stories. But it's real impact that you can see each and every day. So I encourage everybody, check out the website, make sure you donate. And I think that would be a good way to get involved. And like James said, to maybe feel better about ourselves.
No, Luke and James, thanks so much. And absolutely, yes, please do that. And at Autodesk, there's also pro bono teams which have worked with us. We had a pro bono team helping us on a virtual launch of our starter pump because with COVID, it's been difficult to us to bring people together, of course. So we put together a virtual launch, a 1-hour launch where we're showing videos and training videos and all our staff speaking. And we had testimonials from farmers and the like. We have another Autodesk team is going to be helping us with some of our marketing and promotion activities. So you could also join up with one of those teams. And yeah, absolutely, we would appreciate any help. And like I said, money is really our biggest challenge. We have a great team in Africa. We know what we're doing. We know how to have these impacts if we can get them paid for. So thanks.
Thank you for joining us. Again, any of you who want to learn more about the work that Martin's been doing, why don't you just go Google KickStart International? It's going to be the first thing that shows up for you. Really easy to find, and you're going to find just a whole lot of inspiration on that website. Martin, thank you so much again for joining us today. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you. Really a pleasure to be with you guys. Thanks. Thanks, James. Thanks, Luke.
For all of our listeners out there, hopefully you enjoyed this as well. And until next time.
See ya.